There is a moment in every life that arrives without warning, without ceremony, without any dramatic sign from the world around us. It comes quietly, almost shyly, like a breath we did not know we were holding. You may be sitting alone, or walking through a familiar street, or lying awake in the soft glow of night, when something inside you finally admits the truth. You cannot keep living the same way. You cannot keep repeating the same patterns, the same excuses, the same comfortable pain. And the strange thing is that this realization does not explode. It whispers, it murmurs, it moves through you with the gentleness of a leaf floating to the ground. But you feel it. You feel it in the space between thoughts, in the tension behind your ribs, in that quiet ache that says life could be more than survival. Most people expect change to come with fire, but real transformation rarely begins in flames. It begins in stillness. It begins in that soft discomfort that grows each time you deny your potential. And as days pass, this discomfort becomes a mirror you can no longer avoid. You look into it and see the parts of yourself you abandoned, the strength you forgot, the promises you postponed. You see the distance between who you are and who you know you could be. And even though the distance feels overwhelming, there is something honest in that moment, something clean, something that belongs only to you. What we rarely admit is that the desire to grow often arrives together with fear. You feel the pull toward a better life, but you also feel the weight of all the steps you don't know how to take. You imagine the long road ahead and your heart tightens. You wonder if you are capable, if you are disciplined enough, if you deserve the life you secretly dream about. And in this inner conflict, many people freeze. They wait for a burst of motivation that never lasts, or a perfect moment that never comes. They believe change requires a dramatic leap, a complete rewrite of their entire identity in a single act of will. But in truth, we break ourselves when we demand that kind of perfection. There is another way, a quieter way, a way that does not ask you to become unrecognizable overnight, but simply asks you to move. And this is where the spirit of Kaizen enters, not as a philosophy of achievement, but as a philosophy of becoming. Kaizen teaches that mastery is not built from rare moments of intensity. It grows from small, consistent decisions that slowly carve new patterns into your mind. A single choice repeated with honesty becomes a habit. A habit repeated with patience becomes a foundation. And a foundation repeated with courage becomes a new self. This is how a mind of steel is built, not through explosions of discipline, but through steady, almost invisible acts that accumulate like drops of water shaping stone. When you first decide to change, you might feel fragile. Your voice may tremble. Your confidence may waver. But strength is not measured by the volume of your beginning. It is measured by your willingness to take one small step, even when no one sees it, especially when no one sees it. Every quiet decision becomes a declaration that you have not given up on yourself. Every gentle effort becomes proof that you are capable of more than your doubts allow you to believe. And so this is the true beginning. Not the moment you transform, but the moment you choose to try. The moment you listen to that faint inner shift and decide to honor it. From here, the journey unfolds one step at a time. From here, the practice of incremental mastery begins. Real change does not begin with a grand gesture. It begins in the small corners of your day, in the moments you usually walk past without noticing. The quiet pause before you reach for your phone. The breath you take before reacting. The choice to stand up when your mind tells you to stay still. These moments look insignificant on the surface, but they hold the real architecture of transformation. They show who you are when no one is watching, and who you are slowly becoming. And as time passes, you start to see that the smallest decisions often carry the greatest weight. We tend to admire dramatic breakthroughs, but the truth is that most breakthroughs are built from small wins, repeated until they can no longer be ignored. A 5-minute walk becomes 10. A single page of reading becomes a habit. A moment of patience becomes a new kind of self-control. And every time you choose the smaller, harder option, something inside you strengthens. You may not feel it immediately. You may not see the change in the mirror, but the mind notices. The body notices. Life notices. Every small win becomes a quiet vote for the person you want to be. What we rarely admit is that the hardest part of transformation is not the large goals we set, but the tiny habits that seem too simple to matter. We resist them because they do not impress anyone. They do not give us instant results. They do not satisfy the part of us that wants to leap instead of walk. But then you remember how many times rushing has broken your rhythm, how many times seeking big change all at once has left you discouraged. And in that realization, the idea of small wins begins to feel honest. It feels real. It feels like something you can actually build your life on. If you pay attention, you will notice how a single small win can change the tone of your entire day. Waking up slightly earlier gives you a sense of control. Cleaning a corner of your room gives you clarity. Drinking water before coffee gives you intention. Saying no to a small distraction gives you a glimpse of discipline. These moments may appear simple, but they carry an emotional weight that grows with each repetition. They create a quiet confidence that does not shout but stands steady beneath everything you do. As the days unfold, these small wins start to connect. They form a thread that pulls you forward when motivation fades. You begin to trust yourself more because you have proof of your effort. Not dramatic proof, not social proof, personal proof. You look at your day and see that you showed up, even in small ways. And that simple truth is often enough to keep going. In truth, this is the power of Kaizen. It teaches you to honor the smallest improvements, to see progress in places most people overlook. It shows you that momentum is not created by force, but by gentle repetition. And when you live this way, something subtle shifts inside you. You stop chasing transformation and start living it. You stop waiting for the perfect moment and start shaping your life one decision at a time. Over days and weeks, these small wins become the quiet engine of your identity. And so the journey deepens. Each simple step becomes a foundation. Each small victory becomes a promise you keep with yourself. And as this steady rhythm grows stronger, you begin to feel the first signs of real discipline taking root, leading you naturally toward the path of lasting consistency and inner mastery. Discipline does not begin with pressure. It begins with rhythm, a quiet pattern that repeats through your days until it becomes part of who you are. You wake a little earlier, not to impress anyone, but to claim a moment that belongs only to you. You sit with your thoughts, breathe, and take the first small action that aligns with the life you want. And as time passes, these simple choices form a kind of inner structure, not heavy or rigid, but steady enough to hold you when your mind begins to drift. What we rarely admit is that routines shape us long before we notice their impact. You repeat a task enough times, and it stops feeling like effort. It becomes identity. It becomes the quiet truth of who you are when no one is watching. And this is where the real power of discipline lives. Not in forcing yourself into perfection, but in gently returning to the practices that make you stronger, clearer, calmer. Even on days when you feel tired, even on days when you feel lost, there is something grounding about doing the same meaningful actions again and again. You train your body to rise, your mind to focus, your attention to come back to the moment in front of you. You realize that discipline is less about pushing and more about remembering why you started, remembering who you're becoming, remembering that each repetition is a vote for the person you are choosing to be. And slowly, without drama, the scattered version of you begins to settle. The restless version of you begins to soften. The steady version of you begins to grow. But then there are days when the pattern feels heavy. Days when your routine feels like a distant burden instead of a quiet guide. You wake up and feel resistance in your chest. You look at your tasks and feel the temptation to step away. And this is where most people break their rhythm, believing that discipline must be perfect to matter. In truth, discipline becomes strongest in the moments when you return after drifting, when you step back into your practices even with low energy or a foggy mind. That return is what shapes identity. That return is what builds trust within yourself. And as you keep showing up, you begin to understand that discipline is not a punishment. It is a form of care, a way of telling yourself that your future matters, a way of creating stability in a world that constantly pulls you toward distraction. Your routines become a quiet path that leads you out of confusion and into clarity. They give you direction on days when your emotions feel loud. They give you strength on days when your purpose feels dim. They give you proof that you are capable of guiding your own life. Over time, your routines start to feel less like effort and more like alignment. You no longer drag yourself through them. You enter them the way you enter a familiar room with a sense of ease and belonging. And because they are simple and honest, They adapt with you. They shift as your life shifts. They breathe as you grow. Real discipline is alive. It does not trap you. It supports you. It evolves with each new version of the person you are becoming. And as this quiet pattern settles into your days, you feel something changing within you, a steadiness, a quiet confidence, a sense that you are no longer living by impulse, but by intention. And it is here, in this growing stability, that the next challenge begins to appear. Because the deeper you go into any long journey, the more resistance rises from within. And learning to face that resistance becomes the next step on the path toward unbreakable mastery. There comes a point in every long journey when the challenge stops coming from the outside and begins rising from within. At first, the path feels clear. Your routines feel strong. Your direction feels certain. But then something subtle shifts. A tired morning, a restless mind, a temptation to return to the old rhythm you once called comfort. And you realize that the hardest battles are the ones no one else can see. The battles between who you were and who you are slowly becoming. What we rarely admit is that resistance is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of growth. You only feel it when you begin to step beyond the limits you once lived inside. The mind, being familiar with the old patterns, tries to guide you back toward what feels safe, even if that safety comes with stagnation. So doubt whispers. Fatigue weighs on your shoulders. Small setbacks feel heavier than they should. And in those moments, you begin to question everything. Your pace, your progress, your strength. But in truth, this is the natural rhythm of transformation. Every meaningful change wakes up an old part of you that fears being left behind. As time passes, you start to see that resistance is not an enemy to crush, but a message to understand. It tells you where you are growing. It shows you the edges of your comfort. It reminds you that real change is not smooth or predictable. It is layered. It is emotional. It is human. And when you treat resistance with patience instead of frustration, something inside you begins to settle. You stop fighting yourself. You start listening. You start asking honest questions. Why am I hesitant today? What am I afraid of losing? What part of me is struggling to adapt? And in those gentle questions, clarity begins to appear. Sometimes resistance arrives as exhaustion. You show up day after day and suddenly your effort feels heavier than it did before. You wonder if you are moving forward or simply circling the same place. But then you remember that progress often slows right before something shifts inside you. The mind needs time to adjust. The body needs space to catch up. Growth is not a perfect upward line. It is a slow rhythm of expansion and recovery. And when you meet this rhythm with acceptance, the pressure softens. You realize you don't need dramatic strength to continue. You only need the courage to take one honest step. Other times, resistance arrives as doubt, the quiet voice that questions your path. It tells you that your progress is too slow, that your effort is not enough, that your old life was easier. And this voice can feel convincing because it speaks from familiarity. But when you look closely, you see that doubt is simply the mind adjusting to a new identity. It is the echo of who you used to be. And echoes fade as long as you keep moving gently forward. Every time you choose patience over panic, clarity over noise, and courage over retreat, you weaken the pull of old patterns. You begin to trust yourself in a deeper way. Not because you feel strong every day, but because you keep returning to the path even when your mind resists. That return becomes your quiet power. That consistency becomes the foundation of a mind that cannot be easily shaken. And as this inner battle slowly becomes familiar, you start to notice something changing. Resistance no longer feels like a wall. It feels like a doorway, a sign that you are stepping into a new chapter of yourself. And with this understanding, the journey begins to open again, guiding you toward the final truth of Kaizen. How small steps, honest struggles, and steady patience gather into a transformation that lasts. There comes a moment, often without noise or celebration, when you realize you have changed. Not in a dramatic way, not in a way others can easily point to, but in a quiet, steady way that feels rooted deep inside you. You wake one morning and notice that the thoughts which once shook you now feel lighter. The habits that once felt heavy now move with ease. The discipline that once felt forced now feels natural, like a part of your breath. And as time passes, you begin to understand that this is what a mind of steel truly is. Not hard, not harsh, but calm, consistent, and deeply grounded. What we rarely admit is that inner strength grows in silence. It grows in the moments no one sees. The early mornings when you choose focus over comfort. The tired evenings when you return to your routine instead of giving in to distraction. The small decisions that slowly shape your identity without asking for attention. These moments do not shine on the outside. They shine inside you, settling into your character, forming a foundation that does not crack when life becomes uncertain. In truth, the Kaizen path is less about changing your life overnight and more about learning how to move through it with intention. You begin with one small improvement, then another, and slowly your days form a pattern, a rhythm, a steady pulse that guides you. And because each step is simple, you do not overwhelm yourself. You do not chase perfection. You simply grow, quietly and consistently, until growth becomes the natural direction of your life. With time, discipline becomes less of a rule and more of a reflection of who you are. You no longer push yourself with pressure or guilt. You guide yourself with clarity. You understand your limits without judging them. You meet your mistakes with patience instead of frustration. And in that shift, something peaceful forms inside you. A confidence not based on performance, but on presence. A strength not based on intensity, but on continuity. Sometimes you look back and feel surprised by how far you've come, because the progress was so gentle that you rarely noticed it happening. But then you remember the early days, the doubt, the resistance, the slow first steps, and you see clearly how each small choice carried you forward. You see how every quiet effort slowly added weight to your character. You see how the storm inside you softened, not because life became easier, but because you became steadier. This is the essence of an unbreakable mind. Not a mind that avoids struggle, but a mind that meets struggle without falling apart. A mind that stays open when things get difficult. A mind that returns to center even after being pushed off balance. And you begin to understand that inner peace is not the absence of challenge. It is the ability to move through challenge without losing yourself. As time continues, the Kaizen approach becomes less like a technique and more like a way of living. You notice small chances to improve without forcing anything. You feel gratitude in moments that once felt ordinary. You find meaning in the slow pace of growth. You begin to trust that the path is always forming under your feet, as long as you keep taking honest steps. There's a quiet beauty in realizing that the journey does not end, not because you have failed to arrive, but because arrival itself is an illusion. Growth is not a destination. It is a relationship with yourself, ongoing, patient, and alive. And as this truth settles into you, you feel a gentle calm spreading through your thoughts, a sense of belonging in your own life, a sense of direction that does not rush, a quiet confidence that does not need to prove anything. This is the lifelong rhythm of Kaizen. Small moments, subtle shifts, steady progress, a way of moving through the world with intention and peace. And as you carry this rhythm forward, you realize that the mind of steel you've been building is not loud or rigid. It is soft in its strength, rooted in its clarity, and unbreakable in its calm.